our senior counsel for Global Affairs, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, has got a brand new piece up today at ACLJ.org. So it's right on the homepage right now. The Biden administration's Iran negotiations imperil American security. And Secretary Pompeo, you write in your new piece that despite promises during their confirmation hearings by Secretary Janet Yellen and Anthony Blinken in their confirmations that they wouldn't remove any terror-related sanctions on Iran, that there are State Department whistleblowers say that sanctions on the Iranian central bank are first on the chopping block to get back to the JCPOA. Those sanctions, while people might say, first of all, well, are those terror-related or not? This is how they move money around. So would that alone break the promise that they made to the American people?
Jordan, it most certainly would. We all know it's just a matter of common sense that if you provide resources, think 10, think 40, think $80 billion in resources to the Ayatollah and to the IRGC, their terror operation, that they will use this money mostly for terror. Even Secretary Kerry had to admit at one point, sure, some of this money is going to go towards terror. We know that to be the case. They did, during the confirmation hearings, they were asked very clearly, tell me what you're thinking about the deal. They said, we're going to come back with a deal that is stronger and longer and better. And this deal is going to be shorter and weaker and worse. This poses so many threats to our friends and allies in Israel. It creates an enormous threat of instability in the greater Middle East as well. Think about other countries and their desire to get a nuclear weapon so that they can have one too. If the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, and it's bad for the United States of America as well, it will present risks to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines all around the world, and to American security even more broadly than that, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, we're finally starting to see, and I hope it's not just politics. Secretary Pompeo, you've been in Congress too before Secretary of State, and so yes, we're getting close to the midterm, and those Democrats that aren't retiring are getting pretty worried. But we are starting to see more and more bipartisan condemnation of even the negotiations with Iran. So we just saw 18 Democrat members of Congress signed a letter recently. Previously, the left has been pretty much in lockstep with the Biden administration, but people are starting to peel off on a number of issues. Yes, there's politics at play, but hopefully it's also because they do care about our national security. I mean, do you think it's hopefully more than just politics?
For many of them, it is more than just politics. I'll give them credit for that. Senators Menendez and Cardin have all been pretty clear, even back in the day in 2015 and 2016 around the JCPOA. They knew and said they didn't think it was a good idea. They weren't willing to break. They weren't willing to vote against then President Obama or even today against President Biden on sanctions and sanctions-related issues. But they were very clear. These are pro-Israel patriots when it comes to American security issues in the Middle East. And they could see that this is a bad deal. It is crazy to think you're going to give the Iranians money at the very same moment that the Iranians and the Russians are cozying up to each other in Ukraine. This money will flow, Jordan. It'll go from the Iranians to weapon systems in Russia that'll kill Ukrainians. Yep. It's just a bad idea on so many fronts. It is incomprehensible to me to think this administration is going to rejoin it. And I pray that they will return to what we know will deter Iran. That is a strong pro-sanctions, hardline effort to prevent Iran from getting the money it needs to inflict terror around the world.
I think I was putting it that way too, Secretary Pompeo. Explaining that by opening this up for Iran and flowing into Russia, then that again to kill innocent Ukrainians. And the idea that the American people have been so outraged by this, they want to support Ukraine however they can, and yet the administration doing other backdoor moves if they could. They would that would again continue to encourage these countries. Well, it continues to fund their war machine, and that is again, I think that why people have got to think about it three-dimensionally, and not just Iran, U.S., not just Russia, U.S., not just China, U.S., but how all of it works together. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I want to get into a little bit more because you talk about it too in your piece that's up at ACLJ.org. The proxies of Iran stepping up and starting to really cause more issues for our friends in the Gulf states who have moved forward with those Abraham Accords, even without the Biden administration's full-on support, and are trying to still implement those, work with Israel on implementing those. But you mentioned, too, that if Iran gets that weapon, a lot of those friends are going to say, hey, we need one, too, to protect ourselves.
Jordan, the Iranians have used these proxy forces to threaten so many countries in the region. Think about Hamas threatening Israel from the Gaza Strip. Think about Hezbollah dominating Lebanon. Think about the Houthis in Yemen firing missiles, Iranian missiles, into Saudi Arabia, now into the United Arab Emirates. These are nations that have all been working towards building out a more stable, prosperous Middle East. Some of them signed the Abraham Accords to commit to that. And when they see America cozying up to the Iranians, cozying up to the Ayatollah, permitting the Iranians to have a clear pathway to a nuclear weapon, they're going to have less confidence in American leadership and our willingness to help them defend themselves. And they're going to feel like they need to go arm themselves in a way that can actually push back against a nuclear-powered or a nuclear-capable Iran. It is really escalatory. It is really dangerous, and it risks unwinding the central understandings that we were successful putting in place over our 4 years, which made the region more stable. And, Jordan, you know the most important thing about that is it makes the economy more stable here at home, but most importantly, it keeps our kids, our military, our young kids from having to be potentially put in really, really dangerous places to go fight wars there. We want to get out of that. We desperately wanted to stop the wars that we were already in. And we made real progress on each front. This will set us back.
Yeah, I mean, Reuters has got a report out, Secretary Pompeo, I know this is very personal for you, that Iran has continued to reject multiple offers from the United States of why they've had the trouble getting back into the POA of sanctions relief, because they've got to the United States wants them to abandon their revenge talk on the U.S. for taking out Soleimani. And you've got Iranian military officials quoted saying they're never going to say yes to that. It doesn't matter what the sanctions relief. I mean, with just that kind of information coming out of Iran, shouldn't it be just clear enough to our U.S. officials now that we don't want these folks dealing with nuclear weapons, that they won't even have a conversation about revenge killings and sanctions relief, but yet they still want the world to fold to their every whim and desire?
Well, Jordan, I do have a particular personal dog in that fight, but more broadly, it is absolutely the case that the Iranians have for a long time tried to conduct terror campaigns all around the world, including tried to blow up a restaurant right in Washington, D.C. We can't trust them. They shouldn't have resources and money.
Secretary Pompeo, let me thank you for joining us today, and let me encourage folks to check out your piece up at ACLJ.org. It's brand new. It says Pompeo, the Biden administration's Iran negotiations imperil American security. It's great to have you.